Every decade goes by and you have a god you cannot deconstruct, criticize, or attack. And that new god is a guy by the name of Mark Fisher. And I believe Mark Fisher is actually a neoliberal federal agent. I'm not even kidding. And it's always been a theme in postmodernity where POMO professors and tenured academic professors will always take a radical movement, subvert it, and make it incredibly normative and liberal consumer intellectual culture. And what's disturbing about Mark Fisher is that Mark Fisher is basically leaning more towards a quote-unquote left wing, if that's a thing anymore. And for a long time, POMO professors were not left-wing. They're neoliberal. They have leftist characteristics and will spout leftist rhetoric, but ultimately want to be centrist neoliberals with leftist flares. Well, Mark Fisher is more insidious, where he'll invade those once was leftist spaces, quote-unquote, or commie space, if that's even a thing, and then subvert it to say, oh, we're actually a left-wing. Left is good. And it's a little too comfy to a certain neoliberal agenda, as if all SJWism and political correctness is something to strive for this greater liberal intellectualism according to such liberal language. But now let me elaborate why Mark Fisher comes off as a neoliberal federal agent and someone who says he's totally against it. Well, one, for starters, is his pretension. And according to The Guardian, Mark Fisher's K-Punk blog post as a required reading for a generation. This is like in those cheesy Disney movies where the main Guardian character is in the sky, looking over you. See, look at Mark Fisher, and the galaxy, the Milky Way, is all touched. That Fisher was right all along. We have to leave the vampire castle and make a left wing that's acceptable and reactionary and anti-liberal, and it could be whatever you want. It is youth culture. It's living. Look, there's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. They're all looking after us, and totally this seems really planned and pretentious. I mean, this is coming from The Guardian, and then you have Vice magazine, Spin. Oh, did I mention Teen Vogue? Very interesting. But let me get down my criticism right away that I wrote in a Telegram chat. And I wrote this: Mark Fisher is basically a neoliberal Fed trying to get sincere Marxists over to postmodern neoliberalism, as ironic as that sounds, because he tends to be against that. That's it. Give it a touch of the pretentious David Foster Wallace, gear it towards millennials who took a biased and radical philosophy 101 class, the SJW type, and you have a POMO writer of visual culture that regurgitates Francis Fukuyama's theories to those who enjoy Red Scare and the Michael Brooks show. Acid communism is nothing more than a confused POMO subculture without context. But it's in the communist and left canon, you see. It is a G-rated, kids-friendly ideology to those who won't drift too far away from the literature degree at Oxford. Fisher only believes in one reality, the left one. He is intolerant towards anything outside of it or downplays the left as actually being radical as the alt-right. Weird. In addition, he's a tool for young people, so they'll have to read Derrida and Spinoza in political correct terms. Other academic writers like Eugene Thacker and Timothy Morton also reek of overread and overassuming logic towards a neoliberal future. I would even go as far to argue that Fisher stole acid communism from the acid right that was around 2013 to 2017. Again, a pure example of intellectual theft and reappropriation. So let me get further into each points of why Fisher has these neoliberal tendencies. But first, let's go back to his youth. He was pretty normal. I mean, he used to make UK garage and electronic music back in the day when I was only 3, right? I make electronic music now too, and that's something every English person into Warp Records likes, with the burgeoning drum and bass electronic music. I don't know anybody right now who is in, all these leftoid thinkers are not even electronic music. So I have to celebrate Fisher on the fact that he had ambitions just being an electronic musician, right? I mean, I think Eugene Thacker was also in the whole New Brunswick, New Jersey noise scene as well, and his writing could be just akin to his justification of power electronics, but more refined intellectual, talk of the sorts. And so again, I'm making the point that Fisher is really a part of a lazy Gen X generation, right? And again, to mention he was also a part of Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, which was kind of a club based upon theoretical talk of accelerationism and robotics. But accordingly, that around the late 90s, it was becoming quasi-cultish and quasi-religious. And that's interesting in cult behavior. You kind of join these things because this is the cool kids club on Facebook, right? Well, another musician who I really don't like, I'm not fond of, Oneohtrix Point Never, pretentiously cited this collective as an inspiration. But when addressed with Nick Land's far-right anti-liberal race realist logic, he goes, no, not me, right? And it makes me think the same thing about Fisher, that when Fisher will flirt with this kind of semi-alt-right reactionary anti-liberal terms, but won't say, oh, I'm not far-right, I've been left on this entire time. Whatever that means, right? But Mark Fisher is kind of like a new age David Foster Wallace. Bret Easton Ellis, he's, been in the popular publishing writing scene. And when one figure in the institution criticizes another, and you're not supposed to do that, but when Ellis does, the whole media is like, I know why Bret Easton Ellis hates David Foster Wallace. He's not supposed to hate him. This is irrational. He can't say that. And, there's this whole media tirade that you can't hurt the NPR Pomo god of new sincerity, of Ted Cruz republicanism, of alt-centrism David Foster Wallace, right? Well, Fisher is exactly like that, but he's more akin to a left term. You see, a lot of what Fisher says in Capitalist Realism is nothing more than a regurgitation of The End of History and the Last Man by Francis Fukuyama, that all we're going to have is a neoliberal capitalist outlook. And this itself is a fad to advocate Americanism, to not threat the capitalist superstructure, to enjoy subcultures and going in and just being young, being youthful, not being a paternal force. Well, Capitalist Realists comes off as a chicken soup for the teenage soul type of book. Notice that The End of History is a New York Times bestseller, right? And Chicken Soup is also a New York Times bestseller or million seller for Karens across middle America. Well, Capitalist Realism is for cat lady Karens in the suburbs or the urban metropolitan areas of Philadelphia to Baltimore, right? It's just socioeconomic class difference, and pretty much the comfort bourgeois middle class values persuade. And that's what postmodernity needs in order to no one threaten the system. That subculture becomes that. As much as Fisher says, oh, I don't like neoliberal capitalism, he is espousing neoliberal capitalism by going to the Hot Topic store that has hammer and sickles and consuming into it with his so-called acid communism. Now, let me get into that. Now, early when you had Richard Spencer's Alternative Right magazine, you had people like Al Stankard who had acidright.info, and as well as Daryl Basarab, who were posters during 2008 saying that they were acid writers. Brian Pace also kind of looks upon the rich history of a psychedelic right wing. Well, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 2-3 years later, very neoliberal, co-opted New York Magazine articles are writing how Mark Fisher's acid communism inspires a new movement. What movement? And then, and it's going down the Antifa site, meet the two alt-writers going after the Spencer puncher. Shame, shame, like the Nitzer Ebb song, right? And so the same aesthetic of this acid communism had applied to acid right. But I guess this is what you do if you're a PhD of visual culture. You're not really an analytical philosopher or someone of a paternal guardian force looking to have a tenured position, protecting the work of Latin or Plato or anything like that. Instead, you're just kind of an artist, right? Liberal arts guy. Look at this poster for a acid communism meetup of just Marx and the Peter Max kind of coloring. Even this kind of art where it's okay to believe in some kind of hippieism mixed with communism. See, it's more about subculture, not about the logic, As much as Fisher makes the long-winded Timothy Morton argument on, because I've read The Spectre is a dream, therefore all this is a dream, and if you think like this, you are being correct. It's almost enlightening people who like Tupac Shakur and Alain Badu. It's, again, the rhizomic theory fiction, creative writing that's for young people and not for adults. And acid communism is nothing more than intellectual theft and cooperating what was the acid rights and kind of that psychedelic scene. That's why you have now $1 Million Extreme and Frank Hassel as a fight against this. Whatever the neoliberal state wants, it takes its greatest enemy, Marxism, and turns them, instead of criticizing capitalism, you become a part of the system itself, and that renormalization happens. Even his very one-sided, pretentious article about exiting the vampire castle, this is what Fisher writes. We need to learn or relearn how to build comradeship and solidarity instead of doing capital's work for it by condemning and abusing each other. This doesn't mean, of course, that we must always agree. On the contrary, we must create conditions where disagreement can take place without fear or exclusion and excommunication. This sounds like, and not to sound like a PragerU type, the safe spaces of a university. No university has ever sincerely believed in a concept called safe space. And when a university actually believes in the word of safe space, they are using Republican right-wing jargon. Well, now you're seeing liberal jargon here where it's a public forum, like a salon, and you can agree or disagree, and you're just intellectually talking for leisure, right? And to be an adult, you can't be offended, but I'm okay if you're offended. And we're all in this together like some kind of toxic Borg. In a way, this is almost like people who hate being white, and they have white guilt, and they say, yeah, well, I hate being white, but now I understand that hating being white is not productive because I need the cisgendered normal white people to be a part of my movement. So I'm going to pretend I'm some dirtbag leftist open-minded where I can make some kind of race realist jokes here and there and some kind of anti-liberals, but I'm totally not right-wing in the subcultural semantics. And so exiting the vampire castle comes off as a cargo cult, that performing certain rituals somehow everything's going to work out. That is ultimately an echo chamber and a form of Plato's cave. That this article was written for this own selfish group that thinks it has control of the dialogue and in society. It's as if I went to an English lit class, and at the end of the semester, I had to read Exiting the Vampire Castle. Wait a second. Why do we all agree we're a leftist? Why are we talking about leftist jargon? And so, in a way, it's selfish. What if Exiting the Vampire's Castle was written for Countercurrents, a white nationalist blog? Would that be loved by The Guardian, Spin, and Teen Vogue? I don't think so. And so that's the insidious nature of the neoliberal system, is that it will pretend to be your friend and pretend to like leftist values. In other words, egalitarianism, democracy, universalism, they're all byproducts of a neoliberal capitalist system. And what the left is today is nothing more than the synthetic left, as Caleb Maupin would say. I strongly recommend reading the book The Failure of Anarchism by Keith Preston. Don't forget to eat your lunch and make some trouble, because ultimately anarchism, as I said before, under the whiteness canon, is itself a gentrified pastime white people are doing. And if you want to give yourself a semantic identification by calling yourself left, and you hate anything that's right, and you watch Thought Slime and Vosh and Re-Education and Non-Compete. What is this? Isn't this just a new sad cooperation of what was the alt-right 5-6 years ago, when YouTube was just a monopoly of alt-right reactionary channels, is now a monopoly of BreadTube because the power struck, the oligarchs need to control the message, so there is no revolution against neoliberal capitalism. That Mark Fisher will use a gaslighting argument and say, well, the revolution has always been left and there's always been evil right-wing fascists. It's so goofy. It's like you can't, it's like when Trump voters, attack the White House, they're considered fascist, Nazis, and racist. And then by the media, they're called insurrectionists. And then you have Antifa condemning them. Wait, I thought the point of Antifa was to destroy the state, the battle for Seattle. Anything I literally don't like is Hitler. Well, that's Fisher in a nutshell. And so Fisher is a neoliberal agent. His avocation, he's trying to get sincere Marx and Leninist types and people who want to own the means of production to this neoliberal consumer culture. That's why he's attacking young people. He's just some lazy guy with some money and some time to, sit in academia and get a tenure position and then just, say a bunch of stuff and get paid. Eventually, it'll probably drive you crazy. You'll kill yourself. And that's exactly what Mark Fisher did. Killing himself knowing it was all completely useless. So yeah, again, Fisher doesn't belong in a left-wing or communist canon. That's all just postmodern jargon. He's really a part of this continuing plan of neoliberalism. He's just David Foster Wallace, but this time saying he's left-wing and not going for the Ted Cruz new sincerity alt-centricism. So yeah. Class dismissed. Thanks for listening.